Mr. Whitmore, if you sign that page, you won't be buying a company. You'll be buying the lie that destroyed it. Claire Dawson's voice was quiet, almost too quiet for a room built to magnify power. But the tip of Grant Whitmore's fountain pen stopped less than an inch above the signature line. No one moved. Beyond the tall windows of Halcyon's private dining room, rain traced silver lines down the Manhattan glass, blurring the city into streaks of white and gold. Inside, the air smelled of dark coffee, polished walnut, and the faint citrus of expensive cologne. A digital clock on the credenza read 9:29 p.m. 60 seconds remained before the financing agreement expired. Grant sat at the head of the table in a charcoal suit cut so precisely it seemed to hold its own posture. His silver Swiss watch caught the light as his hand hovered over the contract. The pen between his fingers was black lacquer with a narrow gold band, older than everything else on the table and worth far less than the memories attached to it. It had belonged to his late brother. Grant had used it to sign every deal that mattered. Across from him, Victor Sloan wore the patient smile of a man already counting money that had not yet reached his account. Beside Grant, Owen Mercer leaned forward, one palm flat against the table. For 18 years, Owen had been the voice Grant trusted when every other voice in the room wanted something. Security, Owen said, not loudly, but with the confidence of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Claire did not look toward the door. She stood beside Grant's chair in a crisp black uniform. One hand still resting on the leather check presenter she had slid beneath the pen. The first drop of ink had touched the dark surface, leaving a small blue mark where $100 million mistake had almost begun. "Remove your hand," Owen said. Claire's fingers did not tremble. That seemed to disturb him more than defiance would have. Grant lifted his eyes to her face for the first time that evening. Until then, she had been the woman who poured the coffee, replaced the water glasses, and moved through the room without interrupting the men who believed they controlled it. Now every person at the table was watching her. "You have 10 seconds, Grant said. His voice carried no anger. That made it heavier. Claire placed a single sheet of paper beside the contract. "Your agreement goes from page 46 to page 48, she said. Victor's smile changed. Only slightly. A tightening near the mouth. A flicker most people would have missed. Claire did not. Owen reached for the page, but Grant raised one finger. Owen stopped. "Where did you get this?" Grant asked. "From the printer in the manager's office." "You read confidential documents?" Owen snapped. "I read the page someone tried to leave behind." The clock changed to 9:29 and 32 seconds. Rain tapped the glass. Somewhere outside the private room, a waiter dropped a spoon, and the sound seemed impossibly far away. Grant looked down at the sheet. At the top, in small legal print, were the words Schedule 7. 4. Retained and assumed liabilities. His eyes moved once across the first paragraph. Then again, slower. The color did not leave his face. Men like Grant Whitmore did not show shock that easily. But the hand holding his brother's pen lowered to the table. "What is this?" he asked. Claire met his gaze. "The reason Northstar Medical Systems is worth nothing close to $100 million. Owen pushed back his chair. "This is absurd." Claire turned toward him at last. "Then explain why the missing page was printed from your account." 47 minutes earlier, no one in that room had known Claire Dawson's name. 47 minutes earlier, Claire Dawson stood beneath the brass service clock outside Halcyon's private dining room and checked the place settings for the third time. The long walnut table held 6 crystal water glasses for coffee cups, 3 leather folders, and 1 empty chair reserved for a banker joining by secure call. Every object had been arranged with mathematical care. Even the distance between the silverware and the edge of the table measured exactly 1 inch. Outside the windows, rain swept across Midtown Manhattan, softening the lights of passing cars and turning the avenue below into a ribbon of gold. Claire adjusted a dessert fork that had shifted slightly to the left. Paul Bennett, Halcyon's dining manager, watched from the doorway with a folded napkin over one arm. "You know no one in that room will notice half of what you fix," he said. Claire straightened the water glass beside Grant Whitmore's chair. "That does not make it less wrong." Paul gave her a tired smile. He had learned not to ask where she had developed such exact habits. To the rest of the staff, Claire was simply the quiet server who remembered every guest's order and never confused a table number. Paul knew only that she had arrived 11 months earlier with professional references that were strangely brief and an understanding of business language no restaurant job could explain. At 8:42, the private elevator opened. Grant Whitmore entered first. He was taller than Claire had expected, with silver beginning at his temples and the controlled expression of a man who disliked wasting words. His charcoal overcoat carried a fine layer of rain. On his left wrist rested a slim Swiss watch with a black leather strap. In his right hand, he carried a worn brown case that looked older than the rest of his belongings. Owen Mercer followed him, speaking quietly into his phone. He was polished, gray-haired, and reassuring in the way experienced executives often were. Nothing in his voice seemed hurried, yet everyone around him moved faster. "The financing remains available until 9:30, Owen said after ending the call. "The board is waiting. Victor has agreed to every material condition." Grant looked through the glass doors toward the prepared table. "Every condition except the one he delayed for 3 weeks. The licensing language," Owen replied. "It was corrected this afternoon." Claire had been placing coffee spoons on a tray. Her hand paused for less than a second. "Licensing language. Corrected this afternoon." Terms like those belonged to a world she had tried not to remember. Grant handed his overcoat to Paul, then opened the brown case. Inside lay a black fountain pen with a narrow gold ring around the cap. He held it carefully, not like an expensive object, but like something fragile. "Your brother's pen?" Owen asked. Grant nodded once. He believed North Star could change rural medicine. "I intend to finish what he started." The answer explained more than Grant probably intended. The deal was not merely an acquisition. It was a promise carried forward by grief. At 8:48, Victor Sloan arrived wearing a navy suit and an easy smile. He shook Grant's hand with both of his, then praised the restaurant, the view, and the speed of the transaction. Claire poured still water as the men sat. Victor did not look at her when he moved his glass 6 inches to the right. Owen did. "Not there," he said. "Mr. Sloan prefers it above the knife." Claire moved the glass without comment. She had placed it exactly where Victor had requested 5 minutes earlier through his assistant. As she stepped back, a junior attorney entered with the closing folders. He set one in front of Grant and another beside Owen. The folders were identical except for a pale blue mark near the lower corner of Owen's copy. Claire noticed it because the ink was fresh. She also noticed Owen placed 2 fingers over the mark before Grant could see it. A few minutes later, Paul called her to the manager's office. The printer had jammed, and the secure dinner menu would not print. Claire opened the side panel and found a single sheet folded behind the rollers. It was not a menu. Across the top ran a line of small black type, Schedule 7. 4. Retained and assumed liabilities. At the bottom, one sentence had been underlined in blue ink. Claire read it once, then heard footsteps approaching from the hall. Claire folded the page once along the existing crease and slid it beneath the printed dinner menus just as Owen Mercer appeared in the doorway. He did not look surprised to find her there. That was the first thing she noticed. The second was his right hand, still holding the pale blue pen she had seen near the corner of his contract folder. "Is the printer working?" he asked. His tone was calm, almost courteous, but his eyes moved past Claire to the open side panel. "It was jammed," she said. "I cleared it." Owen stepped closer. "Did anything print?" Claire looked at the menu pages in her hand. "Only these." For one quiet second, neither of them moved. Then Owen smiled. It was the kind of smile that closed doors instead of opening them. "Good. Mr. Whitmore does not like delays." He reached for the menus. Claire let him take them, keeping the folded page flat against her palm. Owen turned toward the hall, then stopped. "Miss Dawson." Claire waited. Private meetings remain private. Even when a server hears language she thinks she understands. The words were soft, but they landed with precision. He knew she had noticed something. Perhaps not what. Not yet. "Of course," Claire said. Owen studied her face, searching for resistance. She gave him none. He left. Claire remained beside the printer until his footsteps faded across the carpet. Only then did she unfold the page again. The underlined sentence sat near the bottom. "The buyer shall assume all pending regulatory obligations, contingent claims, and successor liabilities associated with North Star Licensing Limited Liability Company." Claire read it twice. North Star Medical Systems was supposed to own the patents. That was what Owen had told Grant in the hall. But this page named a different legal entity, and placed its liabilities on the buyer. The language was not a correction. It was a trap concealed inside one paragraph. Claire felt the old pressure return behind her ribs, familiar and unwelcome. 3 years earlier, in a glass conference room 30 floors above Chicago, she had found another missing schedule attached to another acquisition. Her supervisor had called it an administrative inconsistency. Claire had called it what it was: deliberate concealment. By the end of that week, the report carried someone else's signature, the deal closed, and Claire's access badge stopped working. The people responsible moved upward. Claire moved out. She had promised herself never again to confuse silence with safety. Yet promises were easy when the truth belonged to someone else. She folded the page into quarters and slipped it inside the order pad at her waist. When she returned to the private room, Victor Sloan was speaking about Northstar's patent portfolio. His voice carried the smooth confidence of a man who had practiced every sentence. "The intellectual property transfers cleanly at closing," he said. "No encumbrances, no third-party claims, no licensing complications." Grant leaned back, watching him with steady blue eyes. Then why was the language corrected this afternoon? Victor glanced at Owen. It was brief, barely more than a reflex, but Claire saw it. Owen answered before Victor could. A naming inconsistency between subsidiaries. Nothing material. Claire approached with the coffee service. Grant's cup was black, no sugar. Owen's had 1 teaspoon of cream. Victor had requested herbal tea, but now accepted coffee without noticing. Claire poured in silence. As she stepped beside Grant, the top folder shifted beneath his hand. Page 46 showed at the upper corner. The next visible sheet was page 48. No page 47. Claire's pulse slowed instead of quickening. That was what happened when fear became evidence. Owen looked up at her. "We have everything we need," he said. Claire met his gaze. "Do you?" The question escaped before caution could stop it. Victor's hand froze near his cup. Grant turned his head. Owen's expression remained composed, but the warmth left his eyes. "What did you say?" Claire lowered the coffee pot. "I asked whether anyone needed anything else." Grant watched her for another second. Then he looked down at the contract, his thumb resting near the missing page number. "Not yet," he said. Claire stepped away, but she felt Owen's attention follow her across the room. On the credenza, the digital clock changed to 8:57. 33 minutes remained, and Claire now understood that someone at the table was counting on Grant never asking to see page 47. At 8:59, Grant Whitmore asked Victor Sloan to explain the ownership structure one more time. Victor smiled as if the question were ordinary. "Northstar Medical Systems controls the patents through a wholly owned subsidiary," he said. "The structure is common. The value remains with the parent company." Claire stood near the service station with a silver coffee pot resting against a folded cloth. She watched Grant turn to page 32, where a diagram showed Northstar Medical Systems at the top and 3 smaller entities beneath it. One box carried the name Northstar Licensing Limited Liability Company. A thin line connected it to the parent. Beside the line was a single word: affiliated. Not owned. Affiliated. Claire had seen companies hide entire obligations inside words that looked harmless. She moved toward the table to refill Grant's cup, though it was still half full. From that angle, she could read the footer beneath the diagram. Prepared for discussion purposes only. Not a representation of legal ownership. Victor continued speaking. "The patents are secure. The hospitals are renewing. The government contracts are stable." Grant tapped one finger against the page. "Stable according to whom?" Owen Mercer opened his folder. "According to the diligence team, outside counsel, and our own analysts." He spoke with the patience of a man calming an unnecessary concern. "We have spent 12 weeks on this." Grant looked at him. Then 12 weeks should make the answer simple. For the first time, Owen's expression tightened. Only at the jaw. Only for a moment. Claire saw it. Victor reached for his coffee and missed the handle by half an inch. He laughed quietly and blamed the long day. Claire noticed a faint blue stain on the side of his index finger, the same shade as the mark on Owen's folder and the underlining on the hidden page. It might have meant nothing. A pen passed across a table could leave ink on anyone. But small things rarely arrived alone. Claire returned to the credenza and removed a clean napkin from the drawer. Beneath it lay a discarded draft of the closing summary. She had seen Paul place it there earlier after the junior attorney replaced the packet. The summary listed the assets Grant would receive: customer contracts, manufacturing equipment, trademarks, software, and intellectual property rights. Claire read the final line twice. All intellectual property rights currently used by the company. Used by, not owned by. The wording was broad enough to sound complete and narrow enough to protect whoever had written it. She slid the paper beneath the napkin just as Owen approached. "Mr. Sloan needs tea," he said. "He ordered coffee," Claire replied. "He has changed his mind." Owen stood close enough that his voice did not need to travel. "You appear distracted tonight." "I am paying attention. That is what concerns me." He glanced toward her order pad. "You should remember what your position requires." Claire looked at the table, where Grant was comparing the ownership diagram with another document. "Accuracy?" she asked. Owen gave a small, humorless smile. "Discretion." He returned to his chair before she could answer. Claire prepared Victor's tea, but when she set it down, he frowned. "I did not ask for this." Owen did not look at him. "You said your stomach was bothering you." Victor stared at Owen, then nodded too quickly. "Yes, of course." Grant noticed. His eyes moved from Victor to Owen, then to Claire. No one spoke for several seconds. The clock changed to 9:04. Owen closed the ownership discussion by turning to the financing schedule. "The bank requires execution by 9:30. We should reserve the remaining time for signatures." Grant leaned back. "We will reserve it for answers." Owen's smile returned, polished and empty. "Naturally." Claire stepped away, carrying the untouched tea. In the hallway, Paul waited beside the service door. He took one look at her face and lowered his voice. "What is wrong?" Claire removed the folded page from her order pad and handed it to him. Paul read the first paragraph, then the underlined sentence. His face lost color. "Where did you find this?" "Inside the printer." "Does Mr. Whitmore know?" "Not yet." Paul looked toward the closed doors. "Claire, these people could close this restaurant with one phone call." She looked back at the room. Through the glass, Owen was leaning toward Grant, speaking with the ease of an old friend. "And one signature could cost him $100 million, she said. Paul folded the page again, but his hands were no longer steady. Paul read the page again, slower this time, as if the words might become less dangerous if he gave them more attention. They did not. "This could be a draft," he said. "It could be outdated." Claire took the sheet from him and pointed to the footer. "Printed tonight at 8:46. The document code matches the closing set." Paul looked toward the office printer. "Can you prove who sent it?" Claire glanced at the small display panel. The machine stored recent jobs for 24 hours. She pressed the menu button, opened the activity log, and found the entry. One page. Secure queue. User. O. Mercer. Paul exhaled through his nose. "That still does not prove fraud." "No," Claire said. "It proves he printed the only page missing from Grant Whitmore's copy." The service door opened before Paul could answer. A young attorney stepped into the hallway, holding a phone against his chest. "Mr. Mercer wants the room cleared of unnecessary staff," he said. His gaze moved to Claire, then to the paper in her hand. He also asked for all discarded drafts. Paul folded the page and slipped it beneath the service ledger. "We are handling the dinner materials," he replied. The attorney hesitated, then returned to the private room. Claire watched the door close. "He is looking for it." Paul lowered his voice. "Then let me speak to Mr. Whitmore. He will ask where the page came from. I will tell him. And Owen will say you misunderstood a confidential document." Paul knew she was right. He ran one hand over his tie. "What do you suggest?" Claire looked through the glass. Grant had removed his jacket and rolled one cuff back half an inch. His coffee sat untouched. Owen was presenting the financing timeline. Victor nodded at every sentence. 3 men. 1 contract. 1 missing page. "I need one more thing," Claire said. She returned to the dining room, carrying a tray of fresh cups. Owen stopped speaking when she entered. The silence was brief, but intentional. Claire set a cup near Victor and allowed her eyes to move across the table without appearing to read. Page 46 ended with a clause referring to Schedule 7. Page 48 began with warranty limitations. The missing page was not optional. It connected the liabilities to the signature Grant was about to provide. Claire moved behind Victor's chair. His folder was open to a corporate certificate. The legal name at the top read Northstar Licensing Limited Liability Company. Beneath it, ownership was listed as Sloan Strategic Holdings, not Northstar Medical Systems. Claire felt the last piece settle into place. The patents did not belong to the company Grant was buying. They belonged to Victor's separate holding company. Grant would purchase the operating business, assume the liabilities, and leave Victor with the intellectual property. More coffee? Claire asked. Victor covered the certificate with his hand. No, his answer came too quickly. Grant looked up. What document is that? Victor forced a smile. A routine subsidiary certificate. Let me see it. Owen intervened. Grant, we reviewed the structure. The certificate is not material to closing. Grant extended his hand anyway. Victor did not move. For the first time that evening, the polished rhythm at the table broke. Claire saw Owen glance at the clock. It read 9:11. We are losing time, Owen said. Grant's hand remained open. Then stop wasting it. Victor passed the certificate across the table. Grant read the first line, then the ownership section. His expression did not change, but his thumb pressed hard against the paper. This says Sloan Strategic Holdings owns Northstar Licensing. Victor leaned forward. Temporarily. The transfer occurs at closing. Where? Grant asked. Owen opened another folder. The assignment is incorporated by reference. Claire looked at the tabs. Asset purchase agreement. Disclosure schedules. Financing. Board consent. There was no assignment agreement. Owen turned 2 pages, then 3. His movements remained controlled, but the search lasted too long. Grant noticed. Show me the transfer, he said. Owen closed the folder. It may be in the electronic closing set. Victor lifted his cup, found it empty, and set it down again. Claire stood beside the credenza, invisible once more, but now Grant's attention had shifted from the men to the documents. At 9:14, the secure conference speaker lit up. A banker's voice announced that funding would remain available for 16 more minutes. Owen looked at Grant. We can clarify the assignment after execution. Grant stared at him. After, Claire felt the folded page against her waist. 3 errors were no longer errors. They were a design. Grant did not look away from Owen. You are asking me to sign before you can show me what I am buying. Owen kept his voice level. I am asking you to protect 12 weeks of work from collapsing over a document that can be delivered within minutes. Then deliver it now. The banker on the speaker remained silent. Victor Sloan shifted in his chair and folded his hands over the certificate. Claire stood near the credenza with the coffee service, close enough to see Grant's reflection in the dark window. He looked composed, but one detail had changed. His left thumb no longer rested on the cap of his brother's pen. It pressed against the edge of the contract. Owen glanced toward Claire. Paul, he called. The manager entered almost immediately. Remove all service staff until the closing is complete. Paul hesitated. Claire saw the decision pass across his face before he lowered his eyes. Of course, sir. She lifted the tray and followed him into the hall. The door closed behind them with a soft click. For 3 seconds, neither spoke. Then Paul pulled the folded page from beneath the service ledger and placed it in Claire's hand. Give it to me, he said. I will take it in. Claire shook her head. They will say you found a stray draft and misunderstood it. They will say worse about you. They already have. Paul studied her. This is not your fight. Claire looked at the page. The underlined sentence seemed smaller now, almost harmless. That was how dangerous language often worked. It hid behind formal words and waited for someone important to stop reading. It became my fight when I understood it, she said. Paul looked toward the dining room. If you interrupt that meeting, you may lose this job. Claire folded the page once and slid it back into her order pad. I lost more the last time I stayed quiet. Inside the room, Owen had resumed speaking. His voice traveled faintly through the glass. He was explaining timing, market reaction, and the cost of delay. Every sentence pushed Grant toward the same conclusion. Sign now. Verify later. Claire recognized the rhythm. Years earlier, her supervisor had used nearly identical words. No one is comfortable with every detail. Every transaction contains uncertainty. Do not become the reason the deal fails. She had been 26 then, sitting beneath fluorescent lights with a report in front of her and 6 senior executives waiting for her signature. She had refused. By morning, her name was gone from the report and her career was gone with it. The memory did not make her afraid. It made the hallway feel suddenly clear. At 9:20, the door opened. Owen stepped out alone. Miss Dawson, he said, you will remain outside until the guests leave. Mr. Whitmore has not seen page 47. Owen's expression hardened. You have no idea what you are reading. I know the patents remain with Sloan Strategic Holdings. You know fragments. I know enough to ask why your account printed the missing schedule. For the first time, Owen's calm slipped. Not much. A slight pause. A breath taken too late. You accessed confidential records. The record was left in the printer. And you chose to keep it. Because someone chose to remove it. Owen stepped closer, keeping his voice low. Listen carefully. You serve dinner. You do not interpret acquisitions. You do not question people whose work you cannot begin to understand. Claire held his gaze. Then why are you worried about what I understand? The question stayed between them. Owen's eyes moved to the order pad at her waist. Hand me the page. Claire did not move. Behind the glass, Grant looked toward the hallway. Owen noticed and straightened his jacket. Paul, he said without turning, replace her. Then he entered the room and shut the door. Paul stood frozen beside the service station. Claire looked through the glass as Owen leaned toward Grant and spoke. Grant's eyes shifted to her. Owen said something else. Grant looked away. At 9:23, Claire stepped back from the door. For a moment, the old lesson returned with full force. Truth did not always win. Sometimes the room simply decided who was allowed to speak. She walked toward the kitchen, reached the corner, and stopped. In her mind, she saw the missing page, the blue ink, the ownership certificate, and Grant's brother's pen resting beside a signature line. Then she turned around. Claire walked back toward the private dining room with the folded page pressed flat beneath her palm. Paul moved to stop her, then stepped aside. He had seen the same thing she had seen in Owen Mercer's face. Not guilt. Fear. At 9:24, the banker's voice came through the speaker again. Mr. Whitmore, we need confirmation of execution within 6 minutes. Owen stood beside Grant's chair now, one hand resting on the back as if the decision already belonged to him. Victor Sloan had recovered his smile. The ownership certificate was gone from the table. In its place sat the final signature packet, open to the last page. Claire reached the glass door and tried the handle. Locked. Owen had locked it from the inside. Paul stared at the brass latch. He has never done that before, he whispered. Claire looked through the glass. Grant was asking a question. Owen answered, then pointed to the speaker. Victor slid the fountain pen closer. The black lacquer caught the light. Claire turned toward the manager's office. The printer log, she said. Paul followed her. On the display, the activity record still showed the secure print job from Owen's account. Claire pressed the details button. A second screen appeared. Document name, North Star Closing Schedule 7. 4 1 page. Time sent, 8:45 p.m. Time released, 8:46 p.m. Can you print the log? Paul asked. Not without the administrator code. Paul looked at the machine, then at Claire. I have it. He entered 6 numbers. The printer came alive with a low mechanical hum. One page emerged. Claire picked it up while the ink was still warm. There it was. The missing schedule. The account name. The time. The document title. Not suspicion. Not memory. A chain. At 9:26, they returned to the door. Paul reached for his master key, but Claire stopped him. Through the glass, Grant had opened the brown case and removed his brother's pen. Use it, she said. Paul unlocked the door. Owen turned immediately. I said no, staff. Claire entered before Paul could answer. The room seemed to contract around her. Grant looked from her face to the 2 pages in her hand. What is this? He asked. Owen stepped between them. An employee who has already violated confidentiality. Claire did not raise her voice. The page missing from your contract was printed from Mr. Mercer's account at 8:46 tonight. Owen laughed once, without warmth. That proves nothing. I printed dozens of closing materials. Claire held up the activity log. This names the document. Victor pushed back from the table. Grant, this is becoming ridiculous. We have 4 minutes. The banker's voice confirmed it. 3 minutes and 50 seconds. Owen turned to Grant. We can complete execution and resolve this afterward. The business risk of delay is greater than the document risk. Grant looked down at the pen. You said the assignment was incorporated by reference. It is. Show me. Owen opened the folder again. He flipped through one section, then another. The electronic set is controlling. Claire placed the missing page near Grant's hand. Owen reached for it. Grant covered it with his palm. The room went still. He read the first line, then the second. His eyes moved to the liability clause. Victor stood. That language is standard. Claire faced him. Then why is North Star Licensing Limited Liability Company owned by Sloan Strategic Holdings? Victor's mouth opened. but Owen answered, "Because the transfer occurs at closing." Grant looked up. "Where is the transfer agreement?" Owen's silence lasted less than 2 seconds. It was enough. The clock changed to 9:28. The banker announced 90 seconds. Victor leaned forward. "Grant, do not let a waitress misunderstand legal language and destroy a deal built over months." Claire turned to Grant. "Do not ask who I am. Ask why your chief financial officer printed the only page you were not allowed to read." Owen's face lost its polished calm. Security. No one moved. Grant picked up the pen. For one terrible second, Claire thought he had chosen speed over truth. He looked at the clock. He looked at Owen. Then he looked at the signature line. At 9:29, the banker began the final countdown. Grant lowered the pen. Claire stepped forward. Claire moved before the pen touched the paper. She slid the black leather check presenter beneath the nib, and the first drop of blue ink landed on its smooth surface instead of the signature line. The banker's countdown stopped in confusion. Owen Mercer's chair scraped softly against the floor as he stood. Victor Sloan stared at Claire as though the room had violated an agreement no one else had been allowed to read. Grant Whitmore did not look at either man. His eyes remained on the page Claire had placed beside his hand. "Lock the doors," he said. Paul closed them. End the call. The speaker went silent. The funding window expired at 9:30, and $100 million remained exactly where it had been. Owen recovered first. "Grant, this is irrational. The bank can reopen the facility tomorrow, but the seller can walk tonight." "Then let him walk." Grant removed the pen from Claire's check presenter and placed it beside the cold coffee cup. "No one leaves until I understand this." Victor rose halfway from his chair. "You cannot detain me over a server's theory." Grant looked at him. "Sit down, Victor." The command was quiet. Victor sat. Claire placed the printer log beside the missing schedule. The document was sent from Mr. Mercer's account at 8:45. It was released 1 minute later. Page 47 was then removed from your closing set. Owen folded his arms. "I printed it because counsel requested a review. That does not mean I removed it." "Then you knew it existed," Grant said. "Of course I knew it existed." The answer came too quickly. Owen heard it at the same moment everyone else did. Grant's gaze hardened. "5 minutes ago, you said the schedule was not material." Owen turned toward him. "It is not." Claire opened the ownership certificate and pointed to the second paragraph. "Northstar Licensing Limited Liability Company owns the patents. Sloan Strategic Holdings owns Northstar Licensing. The company Mr. Whitmore is buying does not own the technology that gives it value." Victor leaned forward. "The assignment happens at closing." "There is no assignment agreement," Claire said. "The closing summary says intellectual property currently used by the company. It never says owned by the company or transferred to the buyer." Grant looked at Owen. "Is she correct?" Owen took a breath. "The language is broader than she understands." Claire slid page 47 closer. "It is narrow enough to leave Mr. Sloan with the patents and broad enough to leave Mr. Whitmore with the liabilities." Grant read the underlined clause again. "Regulatory obligations, contingent claims, successor liabilities," he said. "How much exposure?" Claire answered carefully. "The schedule does not state a final number, but the reserve language references pending federal reimbursement reviews, product warranty claims, and 2 unresolved hospital disputes. If the estimates elsewhere in the packet are accurate, the exposure could approach the purchase price." Victor's composure broke first. "This is speculation." "Then show him the disclosures," Claire said. "All of them." Owen stepped toward the table. "Grant, we can manage the liabilities after closing. The patents remain commercially tied to the operating company." Grant looked up slowly. "You said the transfer occurred at closing." Owen stopped. "Commercially tied is not legally owned," Claire said. No one answered. Rain moved against the windows in thin silver lines. The clock read 9:32. Grant gathered the documents into one stack, aligning their edges with deliberate care. "Paul, contact Halcyon's security director and preserve the printer logs. Do not alter the machine." Paul nodded. "Claire, remain here." Then Grant turned to Owen. 18 years of trust stood between them, invisible and suddenly fragile. "You will provide every communication related to Northstar Licensing, every draft of Schedule 7-4, and every message exchanged with Victor Sloan." Owen's face went still. "You are taking her word over mine." Grant looked at the missing page. "No, I am taking the document you tried to keep from me." Victor reached for his phone. Grant covered it with one hand. Not yet. The room had changed. The most powerful person at the table was no longer the man with the largest fortune or the longest title. It was the person who could explain the truth without needing anyone's permission. By midnight, the private dining room had emptied of everyone except Grant Whitmore, Claire Dawson, Paul Bennett, and two members of Whitmore Capital's legal team. The rain had softened to a quiet mist against the windows. Victor Sloan had left under formal notice that the transaction was suspended. Owen Mercer had surrendered his company phone and access credentials before walking out without looking back. No one celebrated. The truth had arrived, but it carried the weight of 18 years of trust collapsing in a single evening. Grant stood near the glass, his brother's fountain pen resting unopened in his hand. "The first review confirms what you said," one attorney told him. "Northstar Medical Systems does not own the patents. The liabilities were structured to transfer to us, while the licensing company remained with Sloan Strategic Holdings." Grant nodded once. His reflection in the window looked older than it had an hour earlier. And Owen? He approved every revision. Silence followed. Claire began gathering the untouched coffee cups. It was the only ordinary task left in a room that no longer felt ordinary. Grant turned toward her. "Leave those." Claire set the tray down. "All right." He studied her for a moment. "How did a waitress recognize what my attorneys, analysts, and chief financial officer missed?" Claire did not flinch at the word waitress. They were looking at the deal they expected to see. "I was looking at the page someone wanted hidden." "That is not an answer. It is the most important part of it." She paused, then told him about Chicago, about the concealed schedule, about refusing to sign, about losing a career while the people who buried the truth kept theirs. She did not make herself sound heroic. She simply described what happened. Grant listened without interrupting. When she finished, he looked at the black check presenter still marked by one small drop of blue ink. "What do you want?" he asked. Claire's expression remained calm. "Nothing for stopping the signature. Everyone wants something. Then give your company a system where the person who finds the truth does not have to risk everything to speak." Grant looked down at the pen. By morning, Whitmore Capital's board had frozen the acquisition, opened an independent investigation, and ordered a full review of every transaction Owen had supervised. Within weeks, the evidence confirmed a coordinated plan to separate Northstar's patents from its operating company while transferring nearly $98 million in legal and regulatory exposure to the buyer. Claire was invited to present her findings to the board. She accepted on one condition: she would report independently, and no executive could alter her conclusions. Grant agreed before she finished the sentence. 6 months later, Claire became Director of Transaction Integrity at Whitmore Capital. Her office was not large, and she preferred it that way. On the wall hung no awards, only a framed copy of page 47. Grant kept his brother's pen in a glass case outside the boardroom. Beneath it was the unsigned contract and a small brass plaque that read, "The deal that taught us how to listen." He never again allowed a closing deadline to silence a question, and no employee, regardless of title, was ever told that truth was above their position. What would you have done in Claire's place when everyone in the room had more money, more authority, and more reasons to dismiss you? Share your thoughts, and if stories about quiet courage, hidden intelligence, and dignity rising above power mean something to you, subscribe and stay with us. Sometimes power knows how to sign its name, but wisdom knows when the page is wrong.